The midnight guest on a cold winter night in 2011. A small suburban town in Illinois was shaken by a chilling crime. The Anderson family, Mark, his wife Linda, and their 2 children, were found murdered in their home. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, and nothing stolen. The most disturbing detail: neighbors reported seeing a shadowy figure entering the house hours before the murders, but no one ever saw them leave. Detectives quickly learned that Mark had been a witness in a corporate fraud case involving millions of dollars. Just days before his testimony, his entire family was wiped out. The killer was careful gloves, no DNA, no prints, but investigators uncovered a faint trace of cigar ash near the window. This single clue eventually led them to a hired hitman. With military training, the case exposed how organized crime can reach into quiet neighborhoods, turning ordinary homes into crime scenes overnight. It wasn't just a murder, it was a calculated message to silence truth. Introduction to the case. On a bitterly cold winter morning in January 2011, the quiet suburb of Crestwood, Illinois, woke up to news that would shatter its peace forever. The Anderson family, Mark, Linda, and their 2 young children were found dead in their own home. A place once filled with laughter and warmth had suddenly turned into a crime scene that would haunt investigators for years to come. It was the neighbors who first noticed something unusual. The Andersons were a close-knit family who rarely skipped their daily routines. But that morning, their car sat untouched in the driveway, the curtains remained drawn, and no one came out to greet the day. Concern quickly grew into fear, and a phone call to the police brought officers rushing to the scene. As authorities entered the Anderson home, they were met with an unsettling silence. The house was eerily still, the kind of silence that feels heavy, unnatural. Within minutes, the officers discovered the unimaginably aged member of the family lay lifeless, victims of a brutal yet meticulously executed crime. What struck investigators first was the lack of chaos. There were no signs of forced entry, no shattered glass, no broken locks. The rooms were tidy, the furniture undisturbed, as if the family had been sitting together only moments before tragedy struck. It wasn't a burglary gone wrong. It wasn't a random act of violence. This was something darker, something far more calculated. The most chilling detail came from neighbors who reported seeing a figure entering the Anderson residence late the previous night. A tall shadow moving quickly and confidently, as if it belonged there. But strangely, no one saw the figure leave. It was as though the night itself had swallowed them whole. For investigators, this detail became the heart of the mystery. Who was this midnight guest? How did they gain entry into the Anderson home? And more importantly, why did the family welcome them in, or at least not resist? These questions would form the foundation of a case that baffled even the most seasoned detectives. At first glance, the crime scene offered little in the way of answers. There were no fingerprints on the doorknobs, no footprints in the snow outside, no DNA to trace. Whoever carried out the murders knew exactly what they were doing. The killer had come prepared, leaving behind nothing but silence and fear. As word spread through Crestwood, panic began to ripple through the community. Parents clutched their children tighter, neighbors triple-checked their locks, and whispers filled the air. How could such a horrifying act happen in such a safe, family-oriented town? If it could happen to the Andersons, it could happen to anyone. The tragedy wasn't just about the violent loss of life. It was about the violation of a sanctuary. A family home is supposed to be the safest place in the world, but for the Andersons, it had become a trap, a stage for a crime that seemed too precise, too deliberate to be random. And so, as detectives stood in the dimly lit living room of the Anderson house, surrounded by untouched toys and family photos frozen in time, one thing became clear. This was not the work of an ordinary criminal. This was the beginning of a story that would lead them into a web of secrets, lies, and a darkness lurking far beyond Crestwood's quiet streets. Shock in a quiet town. Crestwood wasn't the kind of place where people locked their doors at night. For years, it had been known as a family-friendly town with clean streets, modest homes, and neighbors who looked out for one another. The kind of place where everyone waved when you passed by, and kids played freely in front yards without fear. That's why the Anderson murders hit like a thunderclap. People who had always felt safe within the boundaries of their quiet community suddenly questioned everything. The illusion of security that had wrapped around Crestwood for decades was shattered overnight. Parents who once let their children walk to school alone now drove them every morning, eyes scanning the streets nervously. Neighbors who had spent years hosting block parties and barbecues stopped trusting each other. The sense of unity was slowly replaced by a cloud of suspicion and paranoia. In the local coffee shop, whispers of theories filled the air. Some believed it was a stranger who had passed through town, a drifter who chose the Andersons at random. Others were convinced it had to be someone local, someone who knew the family, someone who blended in too well to be noticed. The police presence in Crestwood grew almost instantly. Squad cars patrolled every street, and news vans parked outside homes to capture the reactions of stunned residents. Reporters described Crestwood as a town frozen in fear, a place where the shadows seemed longer and the nights colder than before. Churches, schools, and community centers held vigils for the Anderson family. Candlelight flickered against the backdrop of grieving faces. Tears and prayers filled the air, but beneath the grief lay another emotion terror. If this could happen to the Andersons, what was stopping it from happening again? The fear was not unfounded. Crestwood had rarely seen violent crime. Most police reports involved petty theft, traffic violations, or neighborhood disputes. The brutality of the Anderson murders was alien to this town, almost surreal, as if violence of that magnitude belonged somewhere else, not here. What unsettled people the most was the mystery. If there had been a robbery, they could have understood it. If there had been signs of a break-in, they could have at least explained it. But the fact that the killer had walked in and out without leaving a trace suggested something chilling. Maybe the murderer had been among them all along. Parents began warning their children not to talk to strangers. Doors that had once stayed unlocked were now bolted shut, sometimes even in broad daylight. The small-town trust that Crestwood had thrived on for generations evaporated within days. And so, Crestwood was left in a state of uneasy silence. A once vibrant community now lived under the weight of unanswered questions. Each family watching their backs, each neighbor wondering who might be hiding behind a friendly smile. For the first time, Crestwood wasn't just a quiet town, it was a town haunted by fear. The victim's background to understand the weight of the tragedy. One must first know who the Andersons were. Mark Anderson, 42, was a hard-working accountant who had built a reputation for honesty and dedication in his profession. He was the kind of man who never missed a day of work and always came home in time for dinner. His wife, Linda, 39, was described as warm and nurturing. A schoolteacher by profession, she was adored by her students for her patience and kindness. Two neighbors, Linda was the heart of the household, always smiling, always ready to lend a helping hand to anyone who needed it. Together, they had 2 children, Emily, 10, and Jacob, 7. Emily was a bright, curious girl who loved drawing and dreamed of becoming an artist someday. Jacob was energetic, mischievous, and always carried his favorite toy car in his pocket. 2. Everyone who knew them, the Anderson children, were a reflection of their parents, happy, innocent, and full of promise. The Andersons weren't wealthy, but they lived comfortably in their 2-story home on Willow Lane. They attended community events, celebrated holidays with their neighbors, and were often seen walking together in the evenings. Nothing about their lives suggested that danger was lurking so close. Mark's career, however, had recently placed him in a complicated position. As an accountant, he had been asked to review financial records for a major corporation facing fraud allegations. What he uncovered would later prove to be far more significant than anyone realized. But to Crestwood, Mark was simply the quiet, hard-working family man next door. Linda's influence on the community extended beyond her classroom. She organized charity drives, participated in church events, and was considered a role model for many young mothers. Her sudden loss was felt deeply not only by her students but also by colleagues who described her as the kind of teacher every child deserves. Friends recalled the Andersons as a family that valued togetherness above all else. Weekends often meant picnics at the park, movie nights at home, or trips to the local library. Their house was filled with laughter, children's drawings taped to the fridge, and family photos lining the walls. What made their deaths even more chilling was how ordinary their lives seemed. There were no scandals, no enemies, no apparent conflicts. To those who knew them, the Andersons represented everything good about small-town life: stability, kindness, and unity.